here we are, week 2 of Dawg Talk with Brock. Thank you for all of you that checked out last week. If you remember, last week was the old Don James purple hat. You know, I'm not superstitious, so I don't believe in wearing, like the same hat, the same outfit to help the Huskies win. I have nothing to do with these games. I have nothing to do with their production. I am just simply a bystander enjoying the product, and I think most Husky fans are after a 2-0 start. We did this a week ago. With what I learned, that was coming off of week number 1, what I think and what I know. And this will be looking back a little bit on the Eastern Michigan win and those things that I learned, that I thought, and that I know. But in particular, in this case, I think we probably got to spin it ahead to the game this weekend. I'm not going to call it the Apple Cup. I'll wait for what I know on that one, and I'll dig into further. But here is what I have learned about the Huskies through 2 weeks of the season. Will Rogers is everything you wanted him to be. When they went into the portal last year, and I thought it was a little odd. I'll just be honest and transparent, as I always try to do on the show and in these moments. I thought it was odd that Will Rogers was at the national title game, right? As were some of the other transfers, and he got there, and obviously the Huskies playing into January meant that second quarter was starting, or winter quarter was starting, and so that he would be there. But I just remember looking to the sidelines, and I was sitting next to Tui during the game. I'm like, man, this is just yet another image, another moment that it just doesn't make sense to me. Will Rogers played for Mississippi State. He played for Mississippi State for 3 years. He threw for 12,000 yards. He was an amazing player. And certainly the program, Washington, had to protect themselves when Penix was leaving and find that next quarterback, as so many of these schools are. I think it's upwards of 60% of starting quarterbacks in the Power 5 are transfers from other schools, and Will fits into that. I found it just odd to be in a Husky jersey when you hadn't practiced, you hadn't played, you hadn't been a Husky, but you've been a Bulldog all year. But that's not really what I learned. What I've learned is that Will Rogers can play this game. What I learned is that Jake Browning comparison that we used in preseason of just getting the ball out, of playing on time, of playing on target, that those things are all real. In fact, 4 weeks into the season, Hudson Card at Purdue is completing through 4 weeks of the season. I don't even know how this is humanly possible. 96% of his passes. Jackson Dirt down there at Ole Miss is completing 87%. Dylan Gabriel down in Eugene, 2 difficult games, completing 84%. And number 4 in the country, completing almost 80% of his passes, is Will Rogers. So he's been what you wanted him to be. When you brought him in as your free agent, you wanted somebody with history and experience and background and would not be overwhelmed. And certainly Eastern Michigan, he's played a lot better foes in the SEC than Eastern Michigan and Weber State, but he's been exactly what Jed Fish has wanted. He has been accurate, as I said, and he'll be tested a little bit more with Washington State this week in a back seven that is a lot better than the 2 back sevens he's faced the first couple weeks. But what I've learned is that Will Rogers, check that box. You needed a quarterback, check that box. The dude's thrown for now almost 14,000 yards in his career. What I think is that Steve Belichick not giving up a touchdown in the first 2 games is extraordinary. Probably very much equivalent to completing 80% of your passes. It's just not sustainable. It's not going to happen. You're going to give up touchdowns. But against Weber State in their challenges, against Eastern Michigan in their challenges, to not give up a touchdown in 8 quarters of football, that's pretty darn good. I think that is tremendous, in fact. I also think the Cougs are going to score a touchdown or 2 or 3 this week at Lumen Field because, well, it is college football after all. And this little quarterback, Mateer, can scoot. And he's got enough weaponry outside and enough pieces. And hopefully for the Cougs, Kyle Williams is back to or nearing 100%, and some of the other transfers can play a role. I also think that Steve Belichick, when he put this tape on Sunday or Saturday night, if he's a Belichick, he probably put it on Saturday night with the early kickoff and was like, what in the heck is this? He probably got on the phone and was like, hey, Bill, I'm going to send you some tape here. And I don't know if you've ever seen any of this in the NFL. And they've seen a lot in every scheme under the sun in the NFL. They've faced Cam Newton. Heck, Bill Belichick brought in Cam Newton, if you remember, to kind of run the ball and be super, super physical. So you have seen Steve Belichick and Bill Belichick have seen dual threat quarterbacks. But what you don't see in the NFL is this air raid plus dual threat plus speed and space plus hash marks that are as wide as they are in college football. This is new. And I think it's going to be a fun little task, a fun little challenge for Steve Belichick to prepare his guys on that chessboard in ways that he really has not had to do over the course of his career. Again, the NFL game is different. The NFL game is about matchups. The NFL game is largely still played in a phone booth. The NFL game, as you saw over the first 16 games played in week number 1, a lot more complementary football, a lot more stopping the run, a lot more line of scrimmage, very, very dependent. The college game, and with the way the Cougs play it, like so many, in speed and space, and get people out and create air and get people out of the box and have a quarterback like Mateer, who did something that no Coug in the history of Washington State football has done at that position, and that's run for nearly 200 yards in a game. I think this is going to be a pretty cool challenge, and I think, and I really wish, that I could hear those phone calls between father and son, between Bill and Steve, of how they're going to put a plan together to corral this guy, to keep him in the tackles, to make sure he doesn't get out, to handle the QB run that's going to be coming their way. That will be a big, big key, and I think a big part of why this is only a 4-point spread and on paper going to be the most difficult foe to this point for Washington. Last thing, here is what I know. I know that I will not call this the Apple Cup for me. I know this is not played in Pullman. I know this is not played at Husky Stadium. I know because of that, this is a very different feel and a very different environment. I know ticket sales have been tough. I know that this is going to feel like an NFL environment. Lumen Field in the 12s, one of the most difficult and tremendous environments in all of the NFL. Lumen Field, when the Cougs played over there a couple times through the years, that the then AD thought this would be a good idea because the populace and the alumni base is west of the mountains. It was not a good idea. It didn't look right. It didn't feel right. It wasn't right. The Cougs are meant to play in Pullman. That's what makes them special. That's what makes this rivalry in the past special. It is East versus West. It is the Palouse versus Seattle. It is the wheat fields versus the metropolis. It is the ag school versus the med school. It is everything that just beautifully made this rivalry great, because they're two totally different institutions with two totally different alumni bases, with two totally different student bodies. One is removed and brings that whole campus together. One is largely a commuter school from around the world. They are different environments. But to strip it and not play it in Husky Stadium and not play it in Pullman, I'd rather just, frankly, and I think the ticket sales have showed this, I'd rather just see it go away until the two sides can figure out how to play this thing on the campus where it deserves. For a century, this has been a special rivalry. For a century, it's been played at the end of the year. For a century, and for my 48 years of life, let's call it 40 as a fan, or 41 as I can remember these games, and watching these two schools collide, it was meaningful. It meant something. It meant Rose Bowls. It meant rivalry. It meant Ryan Leaf. It meant Tim Rosenbach. It meant the throw-in Samoan. It meant Drew Bledsoe. It meant immense talent with Mike Price and all that they built up and games that they won. And no matter what the record was, and there were games where the record was terrible, and the Cougs found a way to still compete and found a way to win. And that's what rivalry is and what it has been. Week 3 of a season, and God bless Jed Fish. And I love his transparency and honesty. And he's right, for his players that have no background in this, most of them, for his players, it's pretty cool to play a quality opponent. And it will ramp up their attention to detail and their emotion. But for the fans and the generations that have watched this, that know what it can be, that know the meaning that it had been in the past, I'm sorry. I'm just not going to call this the Apple Cup. Don't bring that trophy out. Don't present it to somebody in a locker room at the end of the season where Rose Bowls have been on the line, where it's, again, been played in a venue that is very special to these two schools. Just call it what it is. It is a great in-state game where these two schools are going to go at it. But the Apple Cup, it ended last November when I called that game in a pretty emotional vein and a pretty incredible game at that. This is two schools in state, and one that has every right to be furious at the other for the destruction of a conference and no longer having a conference. And it will be emotional and it'll be awesome. And once the ball is kicked, it should be a great game. And Washington will be challenged with adversity they had not been challenged before. But let's not pretend to call this the Apple Cup. Let's not pretend to make it what it no longer is and was for so long. I wish the combatants well. I've learned, I think, and I know that this is going to be a pretty good affair. It's going to be a really competitive affair. One's going to be 3-0, and if that's the Huskies, they'll be ranked. One's going to be 3-0 if it's the Cougs. Jake Dickert, man, you have done an unbelievable job of keeping the thing together and the ship afloat over there through some rocky seas. This is going to be a good one on Saturday, but just don't call it the Apple Cup.